All right, we're beginning 8.2. Also, confidence intervals around a population mean, which we don't have. But now we do not have the population standard deviation. It's unknown. So what changes is I can no longer use a critical z value because I don't have the population standard deviation. We're not using a normal distribution anymore. We're going to be using a t distribution. And we'll have a critical t value, and that comes from our table A3, t distribution. So the first thing we're going to do is learn how to read to get the critical t value for a certain level of confidence. A t distribution is read with the degrees of freedom. The degrees of freedom are on the left side here. It's how we get the critical t value, and that is equal to the sample size minus 1. When you're thinking about a confidence interval, it's going to be the same, although how we get it from table A3 is going to be slightly different. So for example, a simple random sample of size 10 is drawn from a normal population. We're going to find the critical t value for a 95% confidence interval. So we have 95% confidence. First, we need to find our degrees of freedom. So the d.f is short for degrees of freedom, is n minus 1. In this case, it's going to be 9. So I'm going to use this 95% and the 9 to get my critical t value from my t distribution. My confidence is down here, 95%. I'm going to stay in this column and go up to a degree of freedom of 9. So it's 2.262. And it's just the positive because in our confidence interval, we'll be adding and subtracting it from the mean. So we're going to continue to get critical t values in practice using our t distribution. So what do I do if my degrees of freedom are not on the table? Not every number is on this table. So what do you do if your degree of freedom is not on here? If it's less than 200, you have to use the next number on the table smaller. So you got to go up to the next smaller. So say you have 48. It's not on the table. You got to go up to 40. If the number is greater than 200, you use the z value. So once your sample size, degree of freedom is greater than 100, you go down to this z and you actually use a critical z value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and turn it over and go down to these practice problems on the next page. What are they asking for? We're just reading our pink table, reading our t distribution. We're finding critical t values. Notice here I need to know the confidence and the sample size. So if my sample size is 23, my degree of freedom is 22. For 95% confidence, my critical t value comes from my t distribution. I go up from 95 to degrees of 22. 2.074. Here, if my sample size is 18, my degree of freedom is going to be 17, one less than that. For 98% confidence, I'm going to go 98 and 17, 2.567. Now, for this distribution, you cannot use anything but these levels of confidence listed. We're restricted to this table unless you have technology then you are not restricted to this table. So here, if my sample size is 32, my degree of freedom is going to be 32 minus 1, so it'll be 1 less than that. And at a 99% confidence, my critical t value is going to be 2.744. So let's do some more. All for 90% confidence. We'll find and compare three different sample sizes. For a sample size of 3, the degree of freedom would be 2. The critical t value at 90% is 2.920. Degree of freedom of 42 at 90%. 42 is not on my table. If it's not on your table and it's less than 200, you have to go to the next smaller number. So you go up to 40, and we're still doing 90. So it's 1.684. So if my sample size is 256, my degree of freedom is 255. That is not on the table. It's greater than 200, so I use the critical z value. At 90% is 1.645. Notice the larger my sample size, the lower my critical value, and it approaches a normal distribution. So the larger sample size you have, you approach your normal distribution, or you're at it in this case. So in this section, remember degrees of freedom when they're not on the table rules. Next, we're going to be constructing a confidence interval. Just like 8.1, we're just changing the z to t. That's what we'll do in the next video.